want to hit you with a hypothetical scenario. This will be fun. So let's imagine you right now in your bank account have $30,000 and it's just sitting there. This isn't your emergency fund. This is truly just extra savings cash that you just have sitting there. Let's imagine also currently you're standing in a car dealership and you're looking at a brand new car, and guess what? It costs $30,000. This brings us to the age-old question, should you borrow or should you pay cash for that purchase? Now, this topic of whether you should borrow or whether you should pay cash, if you just kind of ask around people in your network, you're likely to hear strong opinions every which way, okay? Today's video is about providing you with some perspective, maybe some frameworks that you can use to approach this question as you're considering a purchase. Before we dive in, I just want to acknowledge that I think there are really two main perspectives that people come at this question and use in considering it. One of which I'll call the mathematical approach, which is people just want to know, hey, well, what's best from a dollars and cents standpoint? What's the best use of my funds? And I'll do that. That's one perspective, the mathematical perspective. The other perspective is kind of more of a values-based perspective, which is usually it's in the form of, hey, I just don't like debt. It's just a principle and a value of mine that if I can avoid it, I don't want to be in debt. And I just want to tell you, I think both perspectives are valid. I don't think there's one or the other that you should adopt wholesale all the time. I think you should be aware of both and how they can interact with each other. And to that end, let's take you back to the car dealership scenario. I'm going to throw you a couple of curveballs and we'll see what happens. So let's say you're standing there, you're looking at the car and you go, you know what? I wonder if I were to borrow, what kind of a deal I could get. So you go over to the finance manager and you ask, what's the interest rate on an auto loan? And let's say they tell you it's 2%. These are hypothetical numbers in the current interest rate environment. Good luck finding a 2% auto loan. But let's say you hear that news and then you call your banker and say, hey, I'm just curious, how much interest am I earning on that $30,000? And your banker tells you 2%. So this is an intentionally apples to apples kind of a scenario in which there's, from a mathematical dollars and cents standpoint, there's no clear answer. In this scenario, maybe there's room for that values-based decision-making framework to kind of supersede. And if you go, you know what, I don't like debt, maybe that means you just go ahead and pay cash and get it done. So let's rewind all the way back to the beginning of the scenario. Let's look at another hypothetical. Let's say this time you go over to the finance manager, you ask them what kind of interest rate you can get, and they tell you 0%. 0%. You can borrow money, buy the car, and not have to pay any interest on it. You just pay that principal balance back over time. It's a good deal. And then you call your bank and go, hey, I'm just curious, how much interest am I earning? And they tell you 5%. Now that mathematical framework for making the decision starts to make more sense, right? Because if you can borrow money for free and in the meanwhile leave your funds in the bank and earn 5%, you almost might want to prioritize that mathematical answer, even if your values-based kind of anti-debt opinion is still there and still valid, you still may want to go the other route. Okay, so what does this admittedly hypothetical scenario tell us? Hey, when it comes to whether you should borrow or pay cash for a purchase, it comes down to this economic principle of opportunity cost, which is to say, if you got a chunk of cash and you think about making a purchase, you got to stop and ask yourself, what else could I be doing with this cash in the meantime? And does it warrant maybe borrowing instead of paying cash? If I have an opportunity to earn more interest on that cash than I would have to pay if I borrowed, then maybe I should hold on to that cash and go ahead and do that. Let me just simplify it for you. You want to compare the amount of interest you would have to pay to the amount of interest you could reasonably expect to earn if you were to retain your cash. That's the mathematical approach. If one heavily outweighs the other, there's your mathematical answer. If they're neck and neck, maybe you can kind of go more from a values-based perspective in terms of what matters most to you. Let me root this in our current reality as far as what's going on in the world. Here in a recent video, we covered the recent interest rate hikes and kind of the effects on that in this borrowing and lending world we're living in. So with the recent interest rate increases, you're noticing that it's more expensive to borrow. Yeah, I think a 30-year mortgage here recently I saw is over 8%. If you've gone and gotten a quote for an auto loan, I can guarantee you it's north of 2%. But on the flip side of that, what you may have noticed is in savings accounts, CDs, those interest rates have increased as well. So in the particular context right now of maybe you're considering, should I pay cash or should I borrow? Should I pay down debt or should I invest my cash? You need to be current. You need to be up to date on what are all the different alternatives that are among your options to select with when you're looking at use of your cash. Now look, those are the two main frameworks that you would use in coming at this question, but there are other considerations. I'll just mention a few here. So let's talk about liquidity. Right, I mentioned in our scenario that $30,000 is just extra over and above your emergency fund. So this question of liquidity becomes very important. Maybe you evaluate a borrow versus pay cash scenario, but to pay cash, that would involve you totally depleting your savings. Well, that's kind of a red flag, right? Because what if you have an emergency and now you've depleted your savings, right? So liquidity almost trumps the other considerations. Okay? Liquidity, that's an important consideration in this. The other one you want to kind of think through is different forms of debt. There's different qualities of debt. Right? So think about what we call productive debt. Let's say you're going to take out a loan to make a purchase that in and of itself is a productive item. Like let's say it's a machine to produce goods and services that you're going to sell and earn a profit from. That's a good debt, right? That's a productive debt that in and of itself can pay for itself, hopefully. That's different than consumer debt. Consumer debt is I'm taking on debt in order to consume goods and services, to buy that car, to buy the clothes, to buy the house, to run up the credit card, right? That's what we call bad debt. And so that pay cash versus borrow, there's a different kind of set of rules for consumer debt versus productive debt. So you've got all these considerations. Again, I think the main thing there is the mathematical versus the values base. That's probably going to handle most of your situations. But look, at the end of the day, if you're looking at your situation going, man, I don't know how this applies to me personally, right? That's where a financial professional would step in, help you make sense of your overall financial plan and help you make a decision. Happy to do that for you. Feel free to reach out if we can be of service.